and know that I'm going to be proactive and do whatever it takes to get back to myself here, then I don't want you on my team. Not ask you to self-select out of here. The neurologist I was describing earlier did that exact thing.
Wow.
I asked him to take off
Yeah.
in not such nice language.
Yeah.
And he got replaced by someone else who had a little more open-mindedness around the possibility that a human being can do whatever it takes to heal themselves, get themselves back to, quote, normal, or as close to that as possible. And that's exactly what I did. Now, the truth is, I never did fly again. I've still got some waivers with the FAA asking me, have you had any seizures lately and things like that. So I've gone a long time without a seizure activity. And hopefully one day I'll get that private pilot's license back and I'll be back in business.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that story. We talk all the time about warrior mindset and mental strength, and when we're talking about sheepdogs and we're talking about people being out in the community and really being ready for not just the fight, but the fight before the fight and then the fight after the fight. It's an incredible story that you have on your fight after the fight, and having enough understanding of yourself, and this was all pre-school, right? This was not, you didn't have your master's degree and Ph.D. before this, or did you?
I had one master's degree and the bachelor's degree. The other master's degree in counseling and the Ph.D. in psychology I did not have at that point.
Okay, that came after you had to learn how to write again with a pencil, and we're told you'd never play volleyball and
right?
all your favorite
yeah,
things.
Twister and all
Right.
that. So the reason I went back to school, Matt, is because that team that helped me recover from that, I wanted to help people recover as well. I wanted to go back. Bear in mind, my father had done that kind of work for 50 years as a licensed clinical social worker. So there's a bit of that, I think, that was in me too, that wanted to be of service in that way, like he had been. But that said, I will say it motivated me beyond anything I could have imagined to work with some of those magnificent healers during my recovery. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to learn something to where I can work with people who've gone through trauma and help them through that as well. And that's what I did.
I think that's outstanding. Everybody has things that happen in life, and we've always been told it's not what happened. It's 10%. The 90% is what you're going to do about it, right? And
Absolutely.
So, I think it's an amazing thing that you, the 90% that was within your control, you went on and not only recovered but have accomplished awesome things since. So let's get into and thanks for sharing your story.
Sure.
On that, by the way. I wanted to talk about some of the things that we're seeing in the media currently with this. Well, really, it starts with the Florida shooting and the Maryland shooting.
Right.
Tragic events. Of course, we know that in Florida, 17 people murdered, many others injured. At the hands of a lunatic, where there was all kinds of warning indicators, and of course, that hindsight 2020 is always crystal clear, and lots of different things that we're all identifying shoulda, coulda, woulda been done. The reality for the 17 families and everybody else that was over there to deal with it, including the community, is that it actually happened, and we all want change. We all want to see this whole thing stop. Not but a week or maybe two, whatever it was the Maryland shooting, and of course we look at the two and we see there's some very distinct differences between the outcomes there,
right,
and the Florida shooting. And I come from a law enforcement background, and I have no problems at all calling the SRO's response what it is, which was just cowardice. I've seen part of the video. There's a video actually of him standing by the wall. Have you seen that?
I have.
Okay.
Yes.
I couldn't get through the full thing. I don't know if you were able to watch the full thing, but I couldn't stomach it. Seeing him standing there, knowing what was happening inside the school, I had to shut it off.
Well, we talk in one of my courses around fight or flight or freeze.
Right.
And so if we we'll never know exactly what was going on in his mind. But as a trained individual whose responsibility is to move toward danger rather than hide from it, that was a pretty difficult thing to have to watch.
Yeah. And that's the truth, right? I mean, I spent 10 years in uniform, and of course, nobody ever really quite knows what they'll do until it needs to be done. Mm-hmm. But there is a job to be done when you're a police officer, when you're a firefighter, when you're a paramedic, you're a first responder, you take an oath, and that is within your job description. Unfortunately, as a result of the wrong person being on the job, and of course that SRO does not represent the masses by any stretch of imagination. And,
no.
But he should have not been on that day. And who knows what would have happened if there had been another SRO that had happened to be on that day.
And maybe for some folks out there who may not know what SRO is, we better explain what that means.
Yeah, that's a school resource officer.
Yeah.
An event that you haven't heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
But, I couldn't get through that video. And, but we all know what happened. So then we see this Maryland shooting take place. School resource officer is there, responds, mm-hmm. and as a result saves countless lives because he immediately goes and addresses a threat after the shooter had already gone and shot two people,
right.
One of which ended up dying. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes. Yes, and you're absolutely right. We will never know how many other people may have been shot, injured, wounded, killed as a result of his actions that day. In my mind, that was heroic.
Yeah,
absolutely heroic.
Absolutely. The interesting part about it all is that Maryland has got some of the strictest gun laws in the country.
Indeed.
And that was a legally purchased firearm.
Right.
Wasn't owned by the attacker. But legally purchased nonetheless in a state that has got some of the strictest gun laws out there, and still managed to affect an active killing event, but was stopped.
It just goes to show you, even in a state in which the gun laws are some of the most strict in America, a trained individual who knows what they're doing, who steps into the arena when he or she needs to do so, can thwart and absolutely put an end to this kind of thing. Really, it's akin to, a criminal does a calculation. They do calculations just like we all do.
Yeah.
And if I know beforehand that I'm stepping into a gun-free zone, and I know I'm going to be able to wreak as much havoc as I possibly can in a situation like that. So it's like people who don't ever even want to own a gun, but they go out and they buy a sign and put it in their yard that says something like "This house protected by Smith & Wesson,"
sure,
or a sticker in the window. And a criminal who sees that, you may not have a single weapon in your house, you may not have ever even touched a gun, but a criminal will do absolute calculation and will go, you know what? There's an easier victim, and maybe I'll step over to a house that doesn't have a sign like that, or definitely will make a calculation not to go there. And some of these schools and just school districts that are making the choice to arm some of the faculty, teachers, staff, have an SRO, school resource officer there that's armed. These folks that are planning on doing these heinous acts will likely think twice about it and go somewhere else. That's why it makes no sense to me, and why it's absolutely beyond the pale of ridiculousness to have what we call gun-free zones, because that's where the criminals go to do the worst damage they can.
Now, is that the case when you talk about the criminals doing these calculations? Those that are suffering from mental illness, no question, our mental health system is broken. That needs to be addressed. We have too many people out there who suffer from something. I don't think anybody out there denies that people who suffer from mental illness, do they do those same kinds of calculations?
Sometimes these individuals, it depends on the personality structure, as we call it. So there are individuals on the planet that don't have the same kind of conscience or remorse that you and I have. They don't have the kinds of empathy for others that you and I have. And these are the kind of individuals that will take a long time to calculate. They think through every sort of end road, every tributary they go down in their mind. They do a what if kind of calculation. What if this happens, and then what if this happens? So they think these things through quite well. And if you notice how, for instance, the Las Vegas shooter, all of the weapons he had, all of the ammunition he had, he was prepared for a lot of different eventualities in that scenario.
When you talk about calculations, he figured out the trajectory. He did the math to figure out where he needed to be pointing his barrel, so that by the time the rounds got to the crowd, they were on target.
Right. Now imagine what it takes to have the discipline to sit around and figure that kind of thing out, and go to the room, find the room that and do the calculations. And so mental illness doesn't thwart any of the intelligence that might be behind some of these heinous acts and some of the calculations that these folks have. It just serves as a platform to kind of cross a boundary that those of us that don't have those issues would never, ever cross.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say anybody who's willing to commit an active killing event is mentally ill. I mean, if you're willing to murder, you go into a public place and shoot innocent people and kill innocent people, would you not? Are they not mentally ill on some level?
I want to say, I want to support you in what you've said about that. On the other hand, I want to make sure that people realize that many times an act of passion, these are different. Now, these are not cold, calculated things like you're talking about, and I want to separate this out.
Yeah.
An act of, a crime of passion, as we call it, maybe temporarily person is not in their right mind, and so they would commit an act like that. We have a defense for that called temporary insanity and things like that. But by and large, a person that it will go through the process, you'd have to assess them after the fact and find out whether or not do they indeed have the same kind of conscience that you and I possess. Do they indeed have empathy for others or not? Do they feel any remorse? These are the kinds of things that would separate someone who has a mental illness from someone who, like you and I, would feel really, really horrible after doing something like that, and so we would never do it. So you're right in one sense that folks who would sit around and dream up these kind of scenarios, gather up the weapons and the equipment to make it happen, most always they're going to have some issues psychologically that put them over a boundary that you and I wouldn't cross.
Yeah. That's you're saying this, and it reminds me of the shooter in Arizona that shot Gabby Giffords. Remember that one?
I do.
And there was obviously the first defense, it seems like, always comes out as mental illness, which was claimed in that case. And if I remember some of the facts correctly, one of the things that ultimately determined he was not mentally ill was that he got in an argument with the taxi driver after he arrived to that Safeway over a tip. And he refused to tip the taxi cab driver and demanded all of his change back.